difference. One thing we have to stop doing is treating all voter ID laws as the same.
Okay, so your answer, I want to move quickly, so it depends is your answer?
Yes, that's my answer.
Okay, so what voter ID laws are racist?
Apologies, Mr. Cruz, your state of Texas, perhaps?
Okay, so you think the entire state of Texas is racist. What about requiring an ID to vote is racist?
So I think, sir, that's pretty reductive. I'm not saying the entire state of Texas is racist.
You just said my state of Texas, so you tell me what about the Texas voter ID laws is racist?
So the fact that the voter ID law was put into place to diminish the political power of Latinos with racist intent, and it had been found to have
You're
racist
asserting
intent.
that. What's your evidence for that?
The federal district court that first resolved the constitutionality of Texas's voter ID law.
Okay, so your view is voter ID laws are racist. How about you, Mr. Yang?
I agree with Professor Tolson. Voter ID laws can be racist.
Okay, that's
the
two.
context.
Mr. Science?
There are some voter ID laws that are racially discriminatory in intent.
Texas's new voting laws are some of the most restrictive in the country, but don't tell that to Ted Cruz. At a Senate hearing yesterday called Restoring the Voting Rights Act, Combating Discriminatory Abuses, University of South Carolina law professor Franita Tolson matter-of-factly shut the senator down when he questioned witnesses on the racist nature of voter ID laws. And when Texas Senator Ted Cruz tried to twist her words into saying the whole state of Texas is racist, she let him and the world know that this wasn't her first rodeo. Joining me now to discuss is Vice Dean for Faculty and Academic Affairs and Professor of Law at the University of South Carolina, Gould School of Law, Franita Tolson, and the President and Executive Director of the Asian American Advancing Justice, John Yang. So, Franita, that was quite the back and forth with Ted Cruz. Give us your take about how he kept playing with language. You know, it was first, you know, how is a law racist? Rather than saying, is the effect racist? Is the intent, you know, is the intent to affect people of particular races? Is the effect to affect people of different races? When somebody says, is the person racist, is the law racist, it requires you to develop a body of evidence that you could almost never develop.
Yes, so it's really interesting, Charles. I just want to point out first that myself, John, and Thomas were there to help Congress put together a legislative record to show the need to restore the Voting Rights Act. And I really think that the exchange with Senator Cruz ended up highlighting the need to modernize the Voting Rights Act because Texas's voter ID law in particular had been litigated over the course of the decade. The 2011 iteration of that law was found by a federal district court to have been passed with discriminatory intent. And so Texas continued to litigate the law and went up and down the Fifth Circuit. And finally, they passed the law again in order to cleanse it of that discriminatory intent. And so Texas it came up a number of times in the hearing because there are just so many examples of Texas doing changes to its election laws that are designed to minimize minority political power, especially its redistricting plans, the voter ID law that we've been talking about. They are known for this. And so I think the exchange with Senator Cruz, although it did take me by surprise, I think in the end, it ended up highlighting the need for a new Voting Rights Act.
Mr. Yang, you know, one of the kind of elegant features of racial discrimination in America is how over time they learn to disguise the language, to take out the direct references and use other things as proxy, either, you know, wealth or geography or, you know, or whatever. And those stand-ins worked almost effectively as writing the word black, white, Asian, whatever into the law. So the challenge that Cruz is making is one that a lot of people who are in favor of these laws will make, which is we have removed all of the language that directly affects you. How then can you say that this law has a racial intent? How do you fight back against that? Because you agreed with Ms. Tolson in that at that hearing.
First, I just have to compliment Ms. Tolson on how wonderfully she did with this starting off question that Senator Cruz had, and she handled it beautifully without hostility, even though he was showing hostility, And it was a master class in how you deal with a senator like that. With respect to the laws, that's exactly right. This is why we need a modernized Voting Rights Act that includes we call practice-based preclearance as well as geographic coverage, because of the fact that we know that people that want to engage in voter suppression change their tactics. They're good at this. They've been doing this literally for 100+ years. And so we need laws that are likewise adaptable, flexible to combat these different techniques.
Ms. Tolson, the voting rights law in Congress has been hung up for months. It is still not clear that anything is going to emerge from the negotiations on the Hill. What happens if Congress does not act to blunt the effects of laws like those in Texas, those in Georgia, those in Arizona, and scores of other states in this country?
So I really think that it's important to look at what's happening with the voting laws in Congress. So the John Lewis Act, which would reauthorize portions of the Voting Rights Act, as well as H.R. 1, which would comprehensively rework many parts of our system of federal elections. If we don't have new laws to address the threats to the right to vote, I don't want to sound alarmist, but I kind of view January 6th as a part of all of this, right? Just sort of a breakdown in our political system, and just a lack of faith in voting as a way to reconcile our disagreements about how the country should be run. It just really showed a sense of urgency to protect the right to vote in order to elevate elections, free and fair elections, as the way we mitigate our differences in this country in order to get away from the violence that we saw on January 6th. So I think that something has to be done. And honestly, you can't really do this work if you don't have hope. So, myself, John, and Thomas, we were trying to do our part because we honestly believe that this is necessary, and we hope that Congress will act on it.
Mr. Yang, how worried are you about copycat legislation if other states see that the Texas law is allowed to stand, does not get struck down by the courts, is not challenged by federal legislation, it stands? What prevents every other state that is interested in restricting the right to vote from copying word for word the law and letter of the Texas law?
There's no question that that's a concern. And to bring in a slightly different topic on your point, that's what we see in Florida with the abortion ban law. Florida is trying to enact the exact same thing that Texas has already enacted. To Professor Tolson's point about having hope, this is where we need your audience members, all of us, to engage in this process, to call your senators, to call your members of Congress, and tell them how important voting is, how important it is to all of us, and how important it is to democracy. Making sure that our voice is heard is going to be important in this process. The last thing I would say is, look, we've dealt with voter suppression before, and we've dealt for it for a long time, and we've litigated it, and we've won. We've also shown up at the ballot box even when they are trying to suppress our vote, and we've won. We saw that in Georgia. We saw that in Arizona. So yes, on one hand, reform is absolutely necessary. Our democracy is at stake. On the other hand, we can't lose hope and stop organizing because of that.
Ms. Tolson, do you think you moved the needle among the people at the hearing today? I think you moved a lot of needles in the public. I think a lot of people were paying attention and cheering. But do you think you moved the needle among the people who need to be moved on the committee?
Probably not, and that's okay, right? Our function in that space was to help create a legislative record that can protect any reauthorized Voting Rights Act from challenging the courts. But I do hope that, even if I didn't change minds, I, turn the page to maybe a new conversation, which is, I just have a question. Who are we? Right. So if we're a democracy, then we need to act like one. We should all have a problem with laws like that, which exist in Texas and Georgia and other states. This should not be it should not be controversial in the year of our Lord 2021 to say that everybody who is eligible to vote should be able to cast a ballot. Something should be behind us. I feel like every generation we say litigating the same things over and over again. But if we're going to call ourselves a democracy, some of these disputes and debates need to be put to rest. People should be able to vote. It really is that simple. If we live in a country where people are not going to be able to vote, then we need to stop calling ourselves a democracy.
When a black woman includes in her statement, in the year of our Lord, she is saying that it is way too late for this to be still happening. I saw what you were doing there, and I appreciate it very much. Franita Tolson and John Yang, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it.